Well, good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen, depending on where you're at. In the U.S., it's essentially just afternoon through the East Coast, mid-afternoon, evening over in Europe, and morning over in Asia. Thank you for joining us for our ongoing academic series, MSP Tech Talk. And this is a hot topic. It's a community roundtable on security. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. A little bit of housekeeping. Use the questions feature to ask your questions of the panelists today. And Jenny over in the radio control room is going to monitor that and interrupt us as she's able to bring forth your questions. And then a couple of places that I look forward to possibly seeing you in the next couple of weeks. I will be at IBM Think all week next week in San Francisco in the Moscone Center. So that's Monday through Thursday. It's both the Global Partner Conference and the traditional IBM Think Conference. So if you're into AI, IoT, analytics, and so on, let me know. We can get together. I have a Fluff Day Friday down in the Bay Area. Then it's just a little bit of time off, and then I'm looking at South by Southwest as well as Ingram Cloud in early March. So Ingram Cloud in San Diego and South by Southwest in Austin as we start to nudge a little bit closer to mid-March. So that's probably it for today in terms of where we might be able to get together. Let's get started. So we have some speakers today. We have Dana Epp, well known in the SMB Nation community, especially from yesteryear with some of our fall conferences. And in particular, I fondly remember when we first took it back to Vegas in 09, 2010, somewhere in there. And Dana, I know you intersected with us several times. Then we have Michael Frazier, who was for a long time an attendee at the SMB Nation events. And then finally, Richard Tubb. Now, Richard, unfortunately, just relayed to us that he is out with the flu. He's out of London, or I'm sorry, out of the UK, and he is a no-go today. So, Richard, hope you're getting well. But let's rewind. Dana, please reintroduce yourself to the SMB Nation community, and I would offer you want to start with Scorpion Software, Kaseya, and what you're doing today.
Sure. So most people at SMB Nation has known me, I don't know, oh gosh, almost 15 years on talking about, securing and providing ways for partners to have secure access to the infrastructure they were managing. And back in the day, I founded a company called Scorpion Software, which built two-factor authentication solutions, single sign-on solutions, and automated password management solutions, which Kaseya acquired to add into their Kaseya portfolio to help protect all of their infrastructure and all their product infrastructure as part of that. When the acquisition occurred, I went down to the States and I became their CTO for 3 years and basically rebuilt their engineering process and practices. Did a bunch of acquisitions that you guys now have all heard about. So everything from Unitrends and IT Glue and Rapid Fire and all that stuff's done now. And but one of the things that was interesting at the time was, I was spending millions of dollars on public cloud infrastructure as part of my role as the CTO there. And I had a really good team of cloud ops guys, but I was finding that we were regularly struggling with some of the basic questions on things like, how safe are we? How are we doing? We had developed, with hundreds of developers deploying stuff all the time. It was so easy for the attack surface of our cloud infrastructure to be changing the ways we may not like. And I looked at the opportunity of possibly building something there, but I realized that I would do better, and I enjoy the startup world. I decided to resign from Kaseya and go and start Wildworks Software, which is where I am now. And we're building back in Vancouver a new product, basically about managing Azure infrastructure in a way that helps them detect configuration problems, security issues, and basically find and fix cloud issues fast. Give them automated remediation so that if you're not an expert in Azure, you can still be an IT cloud ops hero. And that's what we're up to these days. I appreciate the invite to come out and talk about security.
Well, it's nice to get you back in the loop. And so Michael Frazier, maybe if you want to start with, again, I believe you were an attendee at, I think it was the Vegas shows, and now look at you.
I was. I actually did speak at one of your events, I think 2013. So it's
Okay.
been a few years. But yeah, so I'm actually ex-Air Force. Started out in working on weapon systems on F-15 aircraft, and then I transitioned into cybersecurity while I was in Air National Guard. Worked for that for about 6 years, and while I was doing that, I started an MSP. Got bored of that real quick and founded a company that was doing my first venture into cloud, which was private cloud for the SMB. That was over 10 years ago. Found out real quickly that the market wasn't ready for that whatsoever. And got into cloud consulting, had a cloud consulting company. We did a lot of VDI.
I remember that.
And a few years back, decided that I was going to get into orchestration automation of workspaces, and we ended up finding that the orchestration automation was the key, and founded the current company I have, Refactor, about a year and a half ago, to essentially help service providers to build software-defined solutions, focusing heavily on cloud and security, especially around security controls. A lot of stuff to what Dana was saying, the fact that there are a lot of tools out there and a lot of products, but none of them are A, focused on the service provider community, and B, are made easy enough for the average IT person to get into using. So here I am.
All righty. And Richard Tubb, folks, if you want to Tubb blog, that's just the two B's, not a third B, Tubb blog over in the UK. He's a well-known business coach. And Jenny, I just got your ping. Of course, we want to introduce Fortinet, a longtime sponsor of the MSP Tech Talk. Fortinet is a very well-behaved sponsor in our space. They roll like we do. Just to level set, the format of MSP Tech Talk is a long format. We liken it to National Public Radio or Public TV, where we're delivering real content, and then we have well-behaved underwriters that support our efforts, and we encourage you to give them the love they deserve. Finally, one other mention, two mentions. First of all, Michael, your interview with me from a few weeks ago is now posted at smbnation.com. So folks, if you want to go to screen number 2, look under Geek Speak, you'll see that we have, Michael, that ended up being about 40 minutes.
Yep.
Our interview, and it's really cool because it's actually a demo, and it was a custom demo for SMB Nation. So want folks to think about that. And then yesterday, or forgive me, Monday, we launched the MSP Makeover Contest, underwritten by our friends at SureWeb. And need to have you give us a little bit of information, and one lucky MSP will have myself on site for a full day, all expenses covered. So I'm flying out to see you to do a one-day workshop on Finder, Minder, Grinder at a mutually convenient time. Go to smbnation.com to see the MSP Makeover information. Now, why are we here? I want to talk about this, the unconference format, and your questions and concerns drive us. So I have some fire starters. Now, I used this format just last week at IT Expo in Fort Lauderdale. I did a panel on blockchain, and then we did a panel on essentially backup and disaster recovery. And again, it's all about your participation, the audience, raising your hand and asking questions. Now, let me tell you how the blockchain one went. Fortunately, we had enough dialogue amongst the panelists, and we had some fire starters, because when we went out to the audience, there were really no questions about blockchain, if you can believe that. The audience was there to discover what blockchain is. And so, we had a couple questions, but we didn't have any use cases. It's that early, at least at that conference, IT Expo, primarily a telephony conference, that we it was what it was. And then, as you might imagine, the next panel on backup and disaster recovery, a lot more maturity. The audience drove a lot of our interaction. So, gentlemen, it's going to go one of two ways today. It's going to go great, and we're going to go the full time we've allocated. We do allocate 90 minutes, or it's going to go short. and everybody gets back to work sooner than they expected. And I'd like to offer I'm flexible either way. Let's just see where it goes. I do have half a dozen fire starters to get us going. Now, I want each of you to make a pitch. We know how the game's played, and Dana, you've kind of described at a high level what your company is. Maybe if you want to frame it up, how would an MSP work with you? And maybe, give me the elevator pitch on Refractor and your audit tool and that kind of thing.
Well, I can't really comment on Refractor much. I just learned about it recently.
Wild forgive me. Sorry.
For Wild yeah. So really, it's not here about pitching this, because we're still in the process of building it. What we've been doing is, at the end of the day, what I've learned is that so many IT professionals that have to manage production workloads in Azure come down to having the same challenges. It comes down to the ephemeral resources that they're trying to build up, set up, and get going. They're not sure if they're assuming, or they abdicate the responsibility that Microsoft will secure it, which isn't the case. There's a shared responsibility model, so you need to understand what's going on. They're going to set up defaults that make the most sense. They'll typically be a reasonably secure, but ultimately how you use it will change that and cause issues. Same thing goes with how you set up access to your VMs, how you set up access to the database, and ultimately when you're using cloud resources, are you using the right type of resources? It's very common that we see people that basically get the wrong resources and are getting charged way too much money that they don't need to be spending, because they're just not aware of how to monitor and manage and maintain and make sure that from end to end, they're finding the right things in there. On top of that is most of these people just don't have the time or the experience. Microsoft can't even keep up with the documentation for Azure, so how can the IT professionals do it? So that's kind of where we come in, is that we built a platform specifically designed. It's actually part of the Microsoft Cloud as an enterprise application, so you don't even install anything. You literally just turn it on and it automatically makes it available, and it just scans your metadata resources and provides us a way to be able to give you guidance on how to fix things. Going even further, it automatically generates the actual PowerShell scripts. You literally just hit the copy button, paste it into Cloud Shell, and it remediates the issues. And we're constantly tracking that. So we use something called an audit score, very similar to the Microsoft Secure Score, but we're looking at it from the IT professionals view of how do I fix the things that add the most value to protect my customers. And that's kind of the goal of what we're doing. So right now, one of the things I'm excited to do is talk to as many IT professionals that are using Azure to hear what is paining them, so that what we're building will actually meet their needs. So that later in Q2, when we're making it available to the general populace, it's in early access preview right now, but when it's generally available next quarter, we want to make sure that the tooling we provided is actually available for the largest mass, and ultimately just to make it work in their flow, because not everyone can be a cloud ops expert. So we want to make sure we have the right tooling for them, so that they can at least be safe, and ultimately to do something like what I wanted when I was at Kaseya, which was I wanted my director of IT to come give me that health report that gives us confidence and clarity that our cloud resources are safe.
Cool. And you answered one of my questions about general availability. You're targeting Q2. The other thing I wanted to note is it looks like you brought Charlie Russell, well-known Microsoft Press author, friend of mine, friend of yours. So he 1 second on Charlie. So Charlie's on board.
Yeah, so we actually have, as we were building up the team, we were looking at finding the right people that had the expertise. Those who know Charlie know he's written a ton of Microsoft Press books on server management and Azure management. He was actually one of the original authors of all the Azure PowerShell commandlet help docs. And so when we were building all the remediation scripts and automating that, we built an engine that can generate the PowerShell. What better than getting a PowerShell MVP to actually help us build that out? So yeah, we're fortunate to have him. He's our cloud ops advocate. His responsibility is to work with customers, understand what those pains are, and make sure that those automation scripts that we have are on point and resolving the issues we're detecting as they go along. We've also got people on, like I have a co-founder, Andrew Howell. He's a long history of a Microsoft employee. He's spent a lot of time on the marketing side in Azure. And we're continuing to build a solution stack we think is going to be successful for IT professionals who want to use Azure.
Very cool. And then, Michael, let's lead with you are the grand prize winner of the Bake Off for the pitch at IT Nation 2018. You won $100,000. And Congratulations again. I talk about that in the blog, and we talk about that in the corresponding interview people can click through to. So with that lead in, give it your best shot. How might an SMB Nation community member want to think of you and interact with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Harry. Yeah, and it was great winning the pitch competition. And that's the core of what was in the pitch competition is what we are doing at Refactor, which is essentially, there's a major talent shortage out there currently, and it's only getting worse in cloud and cybersecurity. And so our whole goal is to build a platform that takes the approach that most IT professionals that don't know how to code, or that do know how to code but don't want to put in a ton of time to have to build out a bunch of different tools to get in immediately and start being able to build their own solutions, software-defined solutions, and taking an agile approach, a way to iterate on solutions that they build. One of the things, because most system administrators, IT professionals, they may create some scripts, do a little bit of automation. Going into the public cloud and everything as a service is pretty daunting for most organizations. And so we wanted to try to, as much as possible, make it easier, focus a lot on collaboration, so that if you build something, you can share it with others within your team, within other teams, across. So it's not for MSPs, for the ability to even smaller MSPs to be able to get in and pick up quickly on a blueprint of a particular solution that they can deploy that normally could take them hours or even weeks of research, spending time getting into trying to figure things out. And one of the things that I see out there specifically in the channel is that a lot of vendors are playing catch up into getting their products into supporting the public cloud, and most vendors aren't cloud native. And so there's this rush towards, hey, let's get into deployments. To Dana's point about, a lot of companies are getting in to build their workloads into, say, Azure. But the problem is they don't know anything about how Azure works, what an ARM template is, how they would actually automate tasks beyond what they would do with an RMM. And so, and then beyond, even beyond that, understanding the configurations that they're setting for their solutions that they're building, and being able to quickly update them if they have any issues that arise, as well as being able to bring in new products and change old products out, because most MSPs may have a core set of products that they want to offer to customers, but there's a ton of other products that they're looking at. Even at IT Nation, there was a big pitch on, cybersecurity and all these different tools being pushed out, saying we're going to, like ConnectWise is going to support these tools, and they want to do all of this. The problem is most service providers aren't going to just get in to immediately start using the tools. They need to have it in such a way that the barrier of entry is lowered to almost zero, and they can quickly just stand up what they want to use, no matter what the security product is, the cloud service. And so our goal is to enable that. Now, that being said, it's a completely different mindset, building software-defined solutions versus the typical on-premise, hardware-based approach. And so, we're seeing that as taking some time, but I think that we're on the path, and it's great to see other companies like Dana's focusing on the same thing, trying to provide the value. Because at the end of the day, really what it is we're providing expertise that an MSP themselves doesn't have in a product form, so they can start realizing their longer term potential by being able to create their own intellectual property themselves, because that's what it's really about.
All righty. David, go ahead.
When you think about it, it's like all vendors there's so many vendors out there, and we're all trying to solve the same thing, which is make it easier for MSPs to make money, but do so in a way that safeguards the customers, right? And the problem is that security is a process. It's not a product. None of our products will work if the MSPs themselves understand the value of what we're delivering, right? So if they don't see that we're trying to augment in their flow to be able to make it easier for them to create reproducible, safe environments, it becomes a non-starter. But those that get it, they're the ones that end up maturing, having a maturity model that grows their business because they can provide more value-added services with their services on top of these tools, which are, you know, they're keystones to make everything successful, but ultimately they're just a tool in the arsenal that they have to have.
Yes, sir. All right, let's move on. So I created the first fire starter. I'm gonna take this one, and then gentlemen, I welcome your input. So this morning I got, and it's not gonna show up very well, but I got a text from AT&T, free message, private Wi-Fi app is included with your new Business Unlimited plan. Download the private Wi-Fi app and blah blah blah. So I did that on my Android phone. And you know, the use case would be the free Wi-Fi at SeaTac Airport, at an airport, and you hook up your phone, and this is to create a private VPN to have protection. And Dana, I kind of thought of you in particular because it was probably 2009 in that very long room in Las Vegas that looked like a jet airplane, like 3 seats on each side. Yeah. And you scared the hell out of everybody. And I'm going to get to double authentication next slide, but I think one of your things was just how easy it is to get hacked on public Wi-Fi. You had several things, but if you want to respond to this, this just came down today and I installed it, brother.
Yeah, you know, at the end of the day, it all comes down to trust. And the problem with things like Wi-Fi, our native usage, especially on applications like on Android and iPhone, is they try to make it as easy as possible so that you're not using your cell service. We can fly back in and connect up to Wi-Fi. The problem is that the Wi-Fi standard was not designed to be secure. And so if you have the right tooling, which you can go, you know, I got a friend of mine who sells these things called pineapples, and they literally allow you to become man in the middle on a Wi-Fi connection.
Yeah, that's
and whoever has the strongest, you know, and you can go to like Hack5 store and buy these things. But it's how you use them that's important. And the reality is you just got to know your environment and just assume that it's not safe. If you always assume breach is your default standard, you have a little more stress in your life, but then you actually put processes in place. So like I'm at Starbucks all the time, but I'm not on the Starbucks Wi-Fi. If I have to go on the Starbucks Wi-Fi, the first thing I'm doing is creating a VPN into a trusted system I have, because I'm just going to assume that those systems aren't safe. I do the same thing with my cell. You almost always see me tethering to my phone. I don't even use the Wi-Fi or Bluetooth to connect on the phone when I do that, because then I guarantee the connection is safe between the two there. But I'm still assuming that LTE connection is being sniffed by someone I probably don't want to. So I'll put a VPN across that as well. So I have end-to-end trust on the things that are there. I've just built that into my workflow, so it's not a hard thing to do. It's literally just an icon. I click it, I'm connected. That workflow is important because these days everything is connected wirelessly. And so when you start thinking about what's connecting, like if it's a doctor using an iPad trying to connect up to the patient record system, we have an obligation and a responsibility to make sure that they're doing that safely. There's tons of endpoint management tools that exist out there. There's MDM tools that can manage and maintain that to make that a little easier. But in the end, it's all about protecting the data. Information security is about securing information. It's not about securing the device as much, but it's the conduit to that data, which means it's important. So back in, I think it was 2009, yeah, what I did was, with permission, I'll just be clear, we had permission with everyone, is we intercepted the whole hotel and we redirected everything through our connections, and we actually were spoofing DNS and the web pages. So when people were actually going there, we were intercepting it. Now, we said right in the room when they went in, do not use Wi-Fi while you were here. And people were on Wi-Fi and we intercepted them live, and we were just showing them how easy that is. Now, to be fair, it's getting better all the time. It's getting a lot more harder to use those attacks, but there's always more, and it's always available. And there's always some 12-year-old kid on YouTube demonstrating how to hack these things, which makes it easy for anybody if they know what they're doing. We have a responsibility as IT professionals to make sure that data is safe, Wi-Fi or not. Now, Harry, recommendation for you.
Yes,
Never, ever click on a link in an SMS text message to download an application on an Android phone. It's just not safe. It's so easy. One of the demos I was doing last year was showing how to spoof SMS messages and have people connect to a hostile Metasploit site that I built simply by sending a text message. So these things exist. Be careful. Know your audience, know your people, and if you believe it's trusted, just go find another way to get to that resource directly. Don't click on it from a device.
Did you send out that text message, Dana, to to Harry phone his phone.
Harry, your email cost them.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Jenny, any questions that you want to surface or feedback over on the questions feature before I go to the next slide on double authentication?
Not at this time.
Okay. So Dana, again, this is for you. Michael, I have a couple of fire starters for you in a minute. And please pitch in along the way. But Dana, let's rewind the movie and go back to, you got in early. That's your reputation with Scorpion Soft. Your name came up down in Fort Lauderdale, bumped into some of the old crowd roaming around. And so first of all, let's talk about how early you got in, what it looked like, and then now what's the reality today other than, my wife thinks it's a pain in the rear because it takes her longer to get there. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, at the end of the day, strong authentication is all about making sure that you can trust the person and the resource at the time of use. And I got into this, if you remember back in the days of small business server, one of the most amazing technologies was remote web workplace. It was also one of its worst attack vectors because it was so easy back in the SBS 2003 days to actually breach an SBS box simply because of the poorly designed way that the web app worked. And I noticed that as a problem. And when I first was getting into the space, I was trying to work with RSA to get two-factor authentication because they were the premium provider at the time to get it to work. And they were just like, we don't want to touch SBS. That's not enterprise. We don't even care about it. So we reached out to a company called CryptoCard at the time, who has since was bought by SafeNet, but then was bought by Gemalto. And we asked if they would help us, and we built RWWGuard, which was a two-factor authentication solution for remote web workplace. And that's kind of how I got used to the SMB Nation crowd, was because I was the go-to guy for adding two-factor authentication. So a lot of accounting firms and law offices and basically professional services that had to care about that type of thing, we were the only solution out there. And so we were on thousands and thousands of SBS boxes, and that was awesome. And this was way before Duo even existed. And but I decided I wanted to bootstrap that company. So we were going kind of slow and just focusing on being successful in the SMB space. But we were continuing to add more value. We were the only two-factor authentication vendor for Wise and Autotask and Kaseya. And at one point, the founders at Kaseya realized that identity was an important piece of what they wanted to do going forward. So before their acquisition, we had almost completed a really interesting licensing deal. And then with the acquisition by Inside Ventures, that got halted. And then the new CEO came in, and then they bought us and just said, no, we just want that. We want to have access to it and control of that. And now that's part of the Auth stack that is a pillar of K1 and the whole authentication system for Kaseya. Still works with ConnectWise and Autotask. That they've always made sure that it's supported across all those. But ultimately, it was just about make that experience better. Of course, during that period of time, people didn't want to have the key fobs, which is what we had available, and we wrote out the software tokens, which became very useful, and having support for YubiKeys. But since that time, push auth, which is doing notifications directly to a smartphone, has become a much more secure mechanism. And Duo Security did that really, really well. And we built something that did that as well. And that's actually part of what Auth does today. But now even Microsoft does it. It's one of these things where I don't agree with MSPs that just say we don't need strong authentication, because I'm like, it's free to you now. If you have Azure, you have Azure AD and you have MFA. And if you want to go the higher end one, it's $1 a user a month. Like, it should be part of your flow. To answer your pain point though, where your wife's like, it's such a pain in the ass, the fact of the matter is that's a configuration problem. Because you can easily configure to say, listen, when it's a new device that I don't know, or if it's in a new location that I don't know, or if it's running an application I don't know, prompt. But once I've done that and I've got trust with the device and I've got trust with the user, don't do it all the time. And when you look at how like Auth and the Kaseya stack now works, it's like you only get off like once every 30 days, unless of course you do something that is suspicious or different. We just got to do that validation, right? And that's where I think we're coming to this world. You get it now on your Gmail accounts. You can get it on your Office 365 accounts. It works in your RMM and PSA tools. It blows my mind how many MSPs don't believe they need to secure their RMM, because the power that has we get into so many different systems.
Yeah.
Like obviously one of the things we did when I was CTO at Kaseya was look at how could we use Kaseya to take over the entire world, right, from an agent perspective. And it was like if someone got in with a single admin credential, the power that agent has to be able to get into all these different networks and pivot and do is just insane, which is why you want that strong authentication to prove you are who you say you are when you're working at home at 10 at night to help that customer get their systems back up and running. And it's not someone in Taiwan or Russia or Romania that's doing that kind of stuff. So
fair enough.
You know, everyone should be using it, but finding ways to reduce the friction. So it's at the times where you have to prove trust.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do use it and happily. Michael, in your journey throughout life with G3 and VDI and what you're doing now, any observations on double authentication in your world?
Yeah, I feel like it's something that, to Dana's point, everybody should be using. It's kind of disconcerting that it's still not as widely adopted across the board on every single application, although a lot of vendors are adding in native support. To Dana's point, that's free, like on Azure, or it's cheap. It's super cheap. So there's no reason not to, but there's a lot of applications out there too. For instance, you know, if you use an accounting software like QuickBooks Online or Xero, you know, you should be turning on multi-factor authentication. And the issue is it's not required, and so a lot of people aren't thinking about it. And so I think it's imperative that MSPs are auditing their customers, knowing exactly what's required to get stuff up and running in their accounts, and being vigilant about, you know, helping their customers there, because customers first and foremost don't know what they don't know, and so they're expecting the trusted advisor as the MSP to give them that, not only tell them what they need to do, but also help them get to the place where they're actually utilizing stuff like multi-factor authentication.
All righty. Hey, Jenny, let's have a Fortinet moment. If you want to cue that up, we're at the bottom of the hour. Folks, you have joined the Security Roundtable. Please, please, please ask your questions so you can add value to the experts we have on the panel today. But we're going to take a moment to acknowledge Fortinet. Thank you.
For your business to run and make the digital transformation, your network needs to be secure. And because of today's complex network architectures, you've deployed individual security solutions from different vendors. But this complicated patchwork of solutions leaves gaps in your security and compromises its effectiveness. Your response to your complicated network needs to be simple, not complex. Sound impossible? It has been, until now. Fortinet has security solutions for all parts of your network, designed to work together as a simple, integrated security fabric with a single management interface. The Fortinet Security Fabric is broad, integrated, and automated, meaning it protects your whole network from IoT to the cloud from all threats by sharing intelligence in real time, and can even integrate third-party solutions. The Fortinet Security Fabric is a simple architectural approach that finally allows for network security without compromise.
I'm back in. It looks like we're there. Jenny, I'll show my screen in a second. Folks, if you go to the chat feature while I'm bringing up my screen, you're going to see a couple posts I did offline. So one is, if you did not hear the narrative on Fortinet, you have to use your computer speaker. Number two, I posted the link to today's blog on my interview with Michael at Refractor. And then Dana, I posted the link. Do you realize that was like last spring I interviewed you, I believe not too long after you left Kaseya. And I have the link in the chat feature for that, for the interview that we did then. So a couple resources for you. I don't have it in front of me, Dana, but I'm going to say that was 9 months ago. It was some time ago you and I connected.
Yeah.
And I still hold my promise, sir, that I'm going to get up to Vancouver. You know, the irony is it's only, what, 3 hours away. Lovely place, lovely time of year with the snow. So keep the light on.
Okay.
We're going to move on. Gentlemen or Jenny, can you confirm you see my screen? It should say Azure Security.
We do?
Yep, and
Okay.
Harry, we have one question, and I'm going to bring the gentleman on to ask it. It's Jason, so.
Oh, yeah,
I'm
yeah,
gonna
cool.
Try to make this interactive if we can.
Yeah, bring him on voice.
All right, Jason, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Perfect. Do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, so earlier you were talking about double authentication, and I was just wondering, since you mentioned that I guess one of you did a product, or rather worked on a product that ended up becoming, Kaseya's Auth-Anvil.
Yeah.
My question to you is, does Kaseya VSA natively have support for YubiKeys? I was thinking of transitioning everything over to using YubiKeys as a second factor. However, I don't want to only use, the static string that can be stored on a YubiKey. I want it to be like, one-time password, either based on a counter or based on time.
Yeah, so the way you would do that is Auth-Anvil supports not just standard two-factor authentication, but also supports U2F, or universal second factor, and it also supports federated authentication. So the way you would do this with VSA is you would actually set it up for single sign-on, and then you use Auth-Anvil as the identity provider, and then you can use any kind of YubiKey you like. So if you want to do it OTP-based, you can do that, or you can use the universal second factor. That requires a browser that supports U2F, like Chrome. But then what happens is you literally just touch it and that logs you in. And that allows you to provide device trust between the VSA and your YubiKey device. So that's definitely there.
Okay, yeah, but doesn't the VSA also, still use a static password then if you're authenticating it through Auth-Anvil?
No, so what happens is when you set it up for single sign-on, it uses something called SAML, the Security Assertion Markup Language. So it's basically digital certificates between the Auth-Anvil identity provider and the VSA. So what happens is you sign in via Auth-Anvil, and that then creates the token that authorizes you to access the VSA. It also allows you to access anything else in the Kaseya stack. So if you want to sign into your BMS, or you're signing into your Traverse instance, or any of those other products that are part of the Kaseya platform, they all support that same SAML authentication. So you sign in once, you got access to all of your infrastructure that you're managing through the Kaseya stack. And not just Kaseya, there's, I believe, now I've been away from Kaseya for like a year and a bit now, so I'm not sure where they are with some of the stuff, but we had working with Datto on Autotask for some of those mechanisms as well. ConnectWise is done through Auth-Anvil's two-factor auth. So you'd have to do a prompt there plus a prompt. But there was discussions about supporting SAML there as well. And that's a great thing about federated identity is once you sign in one place, if everything supports things like SAML or OAuth, you don't need a password on those other systems because the trust is established by the identity provider. Exactly how Microsoft does it with Azure, right? So when you're connecting to all these different resources, you use the same token, you only log in once. So that's kind of the value and the chain there. And then of course you can control that. You could say when I'm at the office, I don't need it, but when I'm out and about outside of the office, then I do. So that gives you some flexibility when you're in the NOC to not need it if you trust the environment.
Yeah.
Cool. And
thank you.
Jason, where are you located? I'm always interested in where our viewership is. What city are you in today?
I'm in Anaheim, California.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Thank you. And Jenny,
that was awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Dana, question for you, and I just want to take that last term. I think you did a pretty good job, or at least I understood your conversation on remediation with your new startup. Let's talk about visualization. I went to your website and did a little bit of engineering. How can I visualize what you're doing, what your product will do, if you don't mind? Yeah, so you think of it like this. Any type of resource that you run in the cloud has a set of configuration defaults, and those will have, in context to other resources, information that allows us to understand what's going on. And so in the traditional enterprise world, on any kind of complex architecture,
you always have something like a change management database. You have a set of known knowns, and then you have unknowns when people make changes. So what we do is we actually track every single change that happens behind the scenes in the Azure cloud. So behind the scenes, we're actually intercepting those changes, and then we create what are called diffs. So if you've ever worked in the coding world, it's very easy for coders to look at each other's work by looking at things called pull requests, or the abilities to look at what has changed between two periods of time. What we've just done is we've made that visual across a resource over time. By default, Microsoft only holds data for 90 days. We hold it indefinitely. So if you have a resource that says, I need to see how this resource has changed over the last 2 years, you can simply go into the audit trail and then just see what those changes are. So if you all of a sudden have an issue and you need to get to root cause, hey, all of a sudden my web server is down, what happened? And we go in, we can automatically see that 7 minutes ago, someone deployed through Azure DevOps a new instance of the company's app. And we can zone in on that problem and say, and here's what changed. Oh, I see this configuration change. This firewall rule got changed. This NIC was reconfigured. And then that allows people to get to the root cause very, very quickly. The other side of it is just visually having the ability to understand where the biggest risks are. So we look at categorizations of usage. So you have things like compute, which is Azure Functions, virtual machines, all that kind of stuff. You have data security, which is everything from your storage accounts, your SQL servers, your MySQL databases, Cosmos, whatever that may be. Your networking, which relates to all the networking side of that stuff, logging. And what ends up happening is we visually represent the amount of risk we detect based off of Microsoft's best practices guidance, along with the Center for Internet Security's guidance on Azure hardening. When we combine those two things together with an opinionated view of what we think is what IT professionals should be setting and configuring the infrastructure to, we give recommendations visually to tell you, we see this issue and we're going to score this and believe it's a high severity issue worth 10 points. And at the end of the day, your goal is just to constantly improve the environment and improve your audit score by remediating these things by simply taking the output of what we give you, which is a PowerShell script, running it in Cloud Shell, and automatically getting that fixed. Now, we could probably add a button there that would do it for you, but part of our belief and trust is our system actually only has read access to your metadata, doesn't have write access to your actual data. So that allows you to trust us from a least privilege perspective, but gives us the power to give MSPs the information of what's wrong and the instructions on how to fix it. So they can go put it in their run book. So if they want to go and use refactor to create and update their blueprint to make sure it meets a certain criteria, they can take our output and say, oh, I really should reconfigure that to be this way. They go into the refactor blueprint, make that change, redeploy, and then we automatically rescan and say, yeah, you got it, it's fixed, way to go, good job. Or no, you didn't, go back and do it again.
Yeah, and Michael, let me turn the question upside down a little bit for yourself, because when we did the demo, the SMB Nation demo of your product, that folks, again, click on the link in the chat feature, go to smbnation.com GeekSpeak and click through and watch. You're all about UI and visualization. I mean, that's what you do, dude.
Yep, and that's a hard thing to do when it comes to software-defined solution, anything software-defined. So taking Azure, for instance, and what Dana was talking about, having an understanding what is an ARM template, how do I use PowerShell? A lot of service providers may not even be getting into using PowerShell, or they may and may dabble in it, or they may be complete experts in it. So there's varying degrees of technical abilities around being able to understand something that's software defined, but then actually being able to actually write script and code as well. And so from a security standpoint, what we focus in on is you want to have a desired state of what you want for your environment. So, and the desired state is, to Dana's point, about being able to look at what's there and then seeing what the difference is that you need to get to a certain place to remediate that configuration. For us, though, you're building the solution. So we're a layer, an abstraction layer on top, where you'll build that solution out. And then to Dana's point, their product is constantly looking at what is going on in that environment. And then from our standpoint, it's about being able to iterate on the solution and being able to maintain the configuration of that solution. And we do it from currently from a visual perspective, so that if you need to remediate something, in our system, you can simply drag it in and then rerun the blueprint, which is essentially a software-defined solution, visual software-defined solution, to then get to the desired state of what you want to run at that point in time. But we're a system that you run when you want to run it, not like Dana's where it's constantly polling. So we're much more about bringing different systems together, and then you can understand what your configuration is. One of the other things, though, is we're all about single point of truth so that you can maintain how you're building things, and then also understanding the differences between your configurations on each version that you create of that particular blueprint or that solution. And so that way you can keep track of what you're changing inside of there and knowing what you want to have as that particular desired state when you launch a blueprint specifically in whatever cloud that you want. And the other piece is that then you can create your own configuration. You're not working within Microsoft's default either. So you brought up the Center for Internet Security, Dana. There's they came out with a bunch of hardened virtual disks, or virtual instances, I should say. So you can use those if you want to, that are already or used against benchmarks, to utilize stuff like that in our platform, because we're all about being able to use other things that other people are using or doing better than we can, but leveraging them so that you can realize the benchmarks that somebody like CIS puts out, and then being able to use other tools to still scan to make sure that it's still actually representing the benchmark that you require for that particular customer.
Right. As soon as you touch it, the problem is it goes out of compliance, because as soon as they install a piece of software, do something else. And that's kind of what we're doing, is take what you expect from a desired state. If you're using a trusted image, or if you've set up something and said, does it still match to that later? So because the problem with public cloud, no matter what provider you're using, it is so darn easy to make a change that can impact the security or safety of that info, and no one knows. As soon as you have more than one person in an environment touching it, it becomes so easy that, oh, I just need to make this quick change to fix it, not understanding the impact that does. I've actually seen people just trying to get a folder shared in SharePoint and then completely opened up their entire file structure because they weren't thinking that through. Or another time where they opened up a storage account because they were trying to get a file to an accountant, and they ended up opening up the container to the world, and it ended up having sensitive customer data on there, and they ended up having to report the breach in California, which actually has a reputation damage to them. This kind of stuff happens all the time. You know, some of the largest MSPs are no better. DXC Technologies, those are the guys that Ross Perot company, when he merged with HP Enterprise Services, they got together. Now, these guys went out, had an administrator checked into GitHub, an actual administrator's key, and some attackers saw that on GitHub, took the key, then spun up 240 virtual machines in the cloud, used it for Bitcoin mining, kept bringing it down every 4 hours so no one would see it. They had $64,000 in cloud usage because of that mistake, simply because they weren't paying attention. And they had no visual way to know that these ephemeral resources were going up and down and being used in ways that was not intended, simply because someone made a simple mistake of checking in a script that had an administrator's key to the cloud. This stuff happens all the time.
And that's where there's a term out there that we use for our platform, but it's more in the developer world, and if you're in the DevOps side of the world, idempotency, but the essentially being able to run something over the top, detect the changes. If there are changes, then make those said changes. If there aren't changes, then nothing happens, and it moves on to the next thing inside of that sequence of tasks that you're trying to accomplish. And so exactly to your point, Dana, it's so easy to make changes. So you have to have a mentality and culture shift within inside of your organization to be focused on saying, look, we're going to use this particular tool or this particular platform that's going to then be what everybody uses, as opposed to, okay, well, this particular engineer can go in and do whatever they want in Azure, and this person can go, but they're going to use this particular tool. So there's a disconnect on, exactly to your point, not understanding what changes that you're making. And so you can use things that are proactive and constantly monitoring. But I think that the bigger issue here is a cultural shift and a mentality shift on how you even approach being able to build and maintain solutions in the public cloud.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, if you don't mind, Michael, let me capture that with a fire starter that I think speaks towards a mentality and a culture, building a security culture. So the fire starter is cybersecurity, main theme from vendors like ConnectWise and Kaseya, but what does it really mean for MSPs? So I want you to hook this, because I like what you're saying. I think, let me frame it up a different way. Both of you know I had the luxury and the pleasure of doing a big data startup in downtown Seattle a couple of years ago, because SMB Nation's in the fine hands of Jennifer Hallmark day to day. And the big data startup, it was a mentality and a cultural change about what is big data. And so I'm probably not doing a good job, Michael. Let me give you the talk and stick back about, mentality and culture in cybersecurity. So what does it mean for the MSPs? Bottom line, gentlemen.
Yeah. Well, it's a very weighted question, and we could probably spend 10 hours or a couple days speaking on this, but I'll try to be concise and then hand it over to Dana. But I think cybersecurity is a mentality. It's not particularly a set of product sets. It's a way that you go about thinking about how you're going to protect your customers' data. And everything else is ancillary to that. I think that there's, in the cybersecurity world, there are a lot of VARs out there. There are a lot of MSSPs that focus primarily on just trying to push product instead of finding the proper business case and mapping that to the solution, then figuring out the technical requirements and architecture around that. And so I think that you can't just throw a bunch of cybersecurity products at the MSPs and expect that they're going to start A, adopting them, and B, even understanding what that actually means for their customers. So I think for me, first and foremost, definitely appreciate that cybersecurity is becoming front and center. I just think that the messaging needs to be understood by, or be clear to MSPs in the standpoint of, you're not just going to be an MSP and convert into an MSSP. That's not going to happen. You could do it, absolutely, but they're really two different animals and two different types of companies. But can you bring cybersecurity, more cybersecurity practices, principles, processes about how you do things into your organization and have that disseminated to customers? Absolutely. But I think that, the key to all this is, if you go to, say, Azure and you start using Azure, some of the Azure security services, there's a bunch of different things out there that you can use. And the question is, are you using them currently already for customers in some sort of on-premise or data center capacity? And a lot of times the question that is no, they're not even thinking about the compliance requirements and what's required by the customer, and then how that would map into, say, Azure, and then some of the security services in Azure and how you would even set them up and configure them. So I think that adding in cybersecurity as a main theme is great. I just think that messaging really needs to be clear on what that actually means for MSPs and how they can add on additionally to what they already do, as opposed to being this daunting additional sector of the industry that they would now have to bring in a bunch of other tools and a bunch of other products to have to sell to their customers.
Dana?
Absolute security is a myth. With enough money and motive, anything can be breached. So the job of an MSP is to understand risk and understand what is the risk tolerance of each individual customer, because ultimately what we're trying to do is deliver a way to reduce risk to an acceptable level for each and every business we deal with. So no vendor in the world can go and say, buy my software and you will be secure. It doesn't exist. But they try to do it because that's their job. So when you look at companies like ConnectWise and Kaseya, they have a key responsibility to MSPs, and that is to build the right tools that will help them to reduce the risk of their customers to something that's reasonable, while also trying to do so in a way that helps them make money. Because at the end of the day, MSPs are a business. We have a responsibility to security, we have a responsibility to the data, we have a responsibility to the customer, But in the end, if there isn't a way for us to do that, that we can survive and thrive, we're not going to last that long, and we're going to do nothing but harm the customer, because we're going to churn out, or the customer, we're going to take shortcuts and forget to do backups. We're going to forget to set things properly. We're going to forget to educate them, and that becomes a problem. So, I applaud both Kaseya. Kaseya bought Authentable because they wanted to build that security from the ground up years ago. ConnectWise announced this year that they're building this security platform. Those are awesome as entry points, but what matters is how they then leverage that and integrate that to make it successful for them. So, we look at like the acquisitions of RapidFire to put in compliance auditing directly into the tool sets. These are all about making it easier for MSPs to do this, because they can't be experts. There's just not enough time. There's not enough staff out there to do this the right way. In the enterprise where we have CIOs and CSOs dedicated for security, it's entirely different than an MSP where you're walking into a doctor's office who's got 3 nurses who are running around with passwords not on the terminals because they just try to get into their data quickly. So in the end, it's great, but it's not about solving cybersecurity more than it is finding how to reduce risk to an acceptable level and having tooling to help the MSPs to do that quicker, because they can't be experts. They can't be turned into MSSPs overnight, but they can have at least a platform with the tools they're using to hopefully generate more revenue based on good practices by inferred trust, i.e. coming to other vendors like Michael, like myself, that have experience and expertise in security, that say, here's how we can help you along this path to get in the right place. But ultimately, it comes back to managing that risk for the customer.
And Dana, a shout out, Michael, 1 second, just before I forget, but a shout out. I got behind the blue screen. You gave this to me over 10 years ago, maybe 15. Yeah. This is the actual copy, and I've got dog-eared pages, and I've got written notes in it. The E-Myth, and not that we're here for this book, folks, look it up, but the E-Myth, the idea was, and you said it, the MSPs are running a business, and in order to free up, here would be my 2 cents on dovetailing to your comment. In order to free up, the owner kind of has to elevate to be the owner, not the pie maker. And it was because of that Jennifer Hallmark is president of SMB Nation, and my time's been freed up to do more strategy and startups and so on. Michael, I cut you off. Final word on this slide, and then we got a couple more.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, I mean, the whole risk assessment, most service providers already do this in product, doing things like disaster recovery and business continuity, where you ask the customer, what is your recovery time objective? What are you okay with there? And I think that what you realize is that you're already doing things inside of what you would consider to be cybersecurity from a standpoint of, again, it's all about, to Dana's point, about risk. And so you're trying to mitigate risk for the customer, as well as making sure that for your company, you're also not going to have these exponential increases in costs because you're exposing yourself to possible issues as well, or your customers. So, everybody needs to be vigilant, but the issue is that MSPs are already doing this in some capacity, and so everybody has the potential to do it. And I think just honing in on Dana's point about being vigilant and understanding what risk really is and how to solve for that.
All right.
And this world,
yeah. Go ahead.
Hugely changed, because you look at like the Department of Homeland Security's alerts, like MSPs are now being targeted by state actors to use as a pivot point to get into more and more businesses. So at the end of the day, we now have an ultimate responsibility of not just safeguarding our customers' data, but making sure that how we do that, the processes we put in place to safeguard our employees when accessing these client networks, it's critical. Right? Like I had, in the Scorpion days, I had customers that were protecting nuclear power plants, that were protecting hospital infrastructure, protecting banks. It's like at the end of the day, those MSPs have phenomenal access to critical systems that could harm and hurt a lot of people. So when we think about cybersecurity, it's not just about what's not going to happen to my customers. The idea of mean time objectives for tons of different ways of dealing with, if we assume breach and say, how can we get back to a clean state as quickly as possible? Because we can't be experts to try to diagnose and find what was the cause of that 9 times out of 10. It all comes down to understanding how good, healthy IT infrastructure will always trump people who say they know a lot about security. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, you can always recover.
There we go. Hey, Jenny, I think I see a few questions teed up. Why don't we take some questions? Because that's why we're really here, is to hear from the audience.
Yep, and I'm going to bring on Huey. Huey had a couple questions.
Yeah, hey, Huey, right on. Huey, are you there?
Oh, he's saying he doesn't have a mic, unfortunately.
Okay.
I guess type that in. We'll maybe go to another one while he's typing.
Yeah. Well, I think we have them. Jenny, do you want to go ahead and read? I'm seeing them over on the question panel. If you wouldn't mind taking it.
Yep, there is a breach reported by ICS concerning Kaseya and ConnectWise. A DLL or two were comprised and ransomwared 80 clients.
Compromised, yeah. Familiar with that issue, gentlemen? A hack on ConnectWise and Kaseya?
I think I read about it. I don't know the details on exactly what happened inside of that breach, other than there was a breach according to some sort of vulnerability, and supposedly all of the customers got locked out and ransomwared for Bitcoin or something.
Yeah, Michael, I think, was this the headline that flew by yesterday on Joe Panettieri's site, Channel E to E?
So.
Yeah. There was, and I'm the same. I didn't read it. Good question, Huey. Why don't we move on? I think we may have. Oops, let me click back into my primary window. Michael, you had suggested we talk about the market shift to software defined. What does that mean for security for customers? Go.
Yeah, so I mean, the issue is in cybersecurity. There's a what we call AppSec, which is about understanding the complexities of what needs to be done from a security standpoint when it comes to applications that are created. I think though the issue with software defined is that it itself is not actually software. It's configuration that then declares something that then some software does with it. So whether that's infrastructure as code on Azure, whether that's configuration management, being able to build configuration, playbooks, whatever you want to call them, on actual host, they're all software defined. But that doesn't mean that by any means that's more secure. I think that it helps people to become, or organizations to become more agile if they put the time into it. But really, software defined is more about an automation approach to be able to accomplish something. And so, from a standpoint of where I see it, it allows you to incorporate better practices, because you can have a repeatable process to be able to know what exactly your security controls are, how you're going about, and what products you're using, standing them up for every single user or whatever that may be, or customer, so you can standardize your process. And I think a standardized process is key, especially moving to the public cloud, knowing exactly what's deployed for your customer and exactly what security controls that are being set. That being said, though, automation makes it a lot easier once it's in place to make mistakes or do things that can cause issues as well. So I say tread lightly, understand what you're getting into. Dana made the point earlier too. You're not going to become an expert at public cloud and at security, automating security. Most MSPs are not going to be. They're going to leverage other products and trying to get the ability to use, or not just use other products, but trying to build these software-defined solutions. And so understanding where you draw the line and where you want to then leverage other expertise, whether that's through products or other companies providing professional services. So just understand what your limits are, and making sure that, because at the end of the day, it's about what's best for the customer, not so much about what you do or don't know, as long as you're cognizant and understanding of that. So that's my 2 cents on that.
All right. I'll tell you what. Yeah, Jenny, go ahead.
Before we move forward, Tim might be able to help answer Huey's question. So I'm going to bring Tim on to see if he can help us.
Okay.
Yes,
Tim,
so
are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, so this was about the question before. So that there was an MSP in the Midwest who had 80 of their clients ransomware. There's a lot of conjecture around it because it just came out within the last 24 hours. And right now, the belief is that there was a vulnerability in the ConnectWise Kaseya integration in 2017 that has not been corrected. And the thought right now is that that's how the external people got into their systems on the back end, and Kaseya took over and then were able to access all their clients. So that's the rumor, though, and it's out on Reddit if you want to find the information and read about it. So it's still, we don't have any other information besides that at this point. Dana,
comments?
Yeah, actually, interestingly enough, before I had left Kaseya, there was we found some information in a non-supported ConnectWise connector, and we had documented guidance back then and notified all of our customers to not use their connector and instead use the one Kaseya provides, because Kaseya actually invested in their own connector to ConnectWise. And so if that's a concern, I'd reach out to your account manager at Kaseya and see if you can get access to that connector. Go look on Kaseya's community forum and just search for ConnectWise connector. There should be a whole thread about how to safeguard that. That would have been like a year and a half ago. So if someone's getting breached on that, that means they didn't update their connector. They didn't follow the guidance that was issued back then, which gets us back to the whole thing about having healthy IT infrastructure. It's like, even if the vendors are telling you to patch stuff, if you don't have time and you don't do it, you open yourself to risk, right? And in those scenarios, what do you do about it, right? There's tons of ways to reduce that risk and make it, why are you allowing people to connect in through secondary systems to your VSA without stronger authentication? Why are you not isolating that to make sure that only your trusted people are accessing that? There's tons of reasons and probably conjecture right now. I don't know about this exact breach happening right now, but if it's around the ConnectWise connector, that was something that we provided guidance on.
Right, yeah, in 2017. This was just a theory is what the thought is right now.
Yeah, so it's and until you know what's really going on there, it's really hard to make an assessment on there. I think the biggest thing is that if you're currently using ConnectWise and Kaseya together, you owe it to reach out to both vendors and ask them what is the safest way to ensure connectivity between the two systems so that there's not an issue there. And maybe they've worked out that and fixed that between the two, because I know that ConnectWise did agree that they were going to continue to sponsor and fix that connector. But at the time, we had to build one because we knew we needed to protect our customers. So
there you go. And Tim, appreciate the insights. Where are you today, Tim? What city?
Just in the Midwest.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. We'll move on, and then I want to frame up this question for both of our panelists. So, Dana, I see that you have the MVP jacket on, and are you a current MVP? Are you still an MVP?
I am. I've been a Microsoft Security MVP for 14 years. The last 7 years as an Azure Security MVP. I've also been a Microsoft Regional Director for 4 years now. So outside of my day job of building software companies, I'm also spending a lot of time with Microsoft, both at the executive level and at the technical level, on the future of where we're going with Azure, which is awesome because I get to play and get early access and help to define where Microsoft's going in the Azure world, which is I really appreciate. So
cool. And then, Michael, I peeked at your LinkedIn profile, and you're a member of an Azure Advisory Council. Now, is that a product council or is that a partner council? But you had something about you have a connection with Microsoft.
Yep, it's a under NDA group of advisors. It's invite only, and there's a special Yammer account that we all get access to and can talk within and ask questions and get early access and give feedback as well. So I've given feedback on things like before the Azure Stack came out, around some of the security that they were going to implement on the Azure Stack, stuff like that. So that's Azure Advisors.
Okay, and I'll tell you the reason I ask is the two titles you both hold are what I would call earned titles, that you've earned that title. If you got a doctorate of letters for giving a speech, that's an honorary title. You're not really a PhD. and I really want to frame up this question this way, that we're a business of acronyms. And here's my concern. The question is straightforward, but the spin I want is we're getting a little bit loose, throwing around MSSP. We always do in this industry, that these are I think you can earn the right to call yourself an MSSP, and I think you should earn that right, but I think some people take that as an honor and just slap it up. And so I kind of wanted to frame it up about, first of all, in my opinion, an MSP should only call themselves an MSP when over 50% of their revenue is from that recurring motion. That's my standard. Maybe what I'm really asking is, at what point can you call yourself an earned MSSP other than just printing a title? Thoughts?
Yeah. Well, do you want to take this one, Dana? I can.
Go ahead.
Okay. So MSSPs traditionally are focused 100% on security products and services providing to customers. And what I mean by that is whether it's IAM products or privileged access management or CASB. These are all different acronyms. CASB is Cloud Application Services Broker, and privileged access management, PAM, and so on. I mean, and risk third-party risk assessment, and I mean, there's a long list of things that you can provide, pen testing and AppSec, code review, all kinds of different stuff. And so an MSSP to me is somebody that only provides those particular cybersecurity services that have something to do with the different domains inside of cybersecurity itself, as opposed to an MSP who is traditionally providing help desk support. An MSSP might also provide a managed SOC, a security operations center. So their whole focus is around providing capabilities around various cybersecurity products, building a cybersecurity practice around, again, being able to do risk assessments, being able to do assessments around different security controls. Everything is security centric, as opposed to being a piece of what you do, because every MSP does some security somehow, some way, but that's not the core of their business. And I think that's where it separates. And that's also why a majority of MSPs will never become MSSPs, because their core business isn't to just provide security services or to organizations. For instance, an MSSP will go into a company and do PCI audits. They can do different types of compliance audits depending on the type of customer. They're going to make recommendations around what type of IAM solution that they should be able to select, and the different products out there that a company's looking at from a security standpoint specifically, versus coming in and doing everything, like architecting the infrastructure from the ground up. And they may look at the infrastructure and look at the different security controls that are mapped to those, but by no means are they going to normally going to actually architect out the base infrastructure or the base applications that are installed. They're going to solely look at what the security implications are and the security risk is for particular whatever the customer is trying to do.
Okay, let's move on. We got about 15 minutes left, folks. Queue up those final questions. Jenny will raise her hand. So let's keep going. We have a couple more fire starters. Security orchestration, automation, response, SOAR. What is it, and why should I care as an MSP? Gentlemen, Michael, I believe you submitted this. If you want to start with that, Dana, if you want to add value. Michael?
Yeah, so there's this term thrown out there nowadays. There's products out there that called Phantom, Demisto, a lot of enterprises are getting into using these products, and it's primarily around incident response, understanding, if a breach happens or there's an incident that happens, having the ability to respond to it and remediate through actionable steps. I think that a lot of organizations are looking at SOAR or some form of SOAR. And in the MSP world, it's kind of this elusive product offering that most aren't going to get into, because usually it's too expensive for what's out there, or if it's not, it takes some time and effort to actually understand. I mean, it's no different than what we're doing at Refactor, and the fact that you have to put time and effort and energy into even understanding what you're doing on a day-to-day basis and breaking it down into simple tasks before you can actually automate those tasks, then chain them together into larger orchestration capabilities, or in the security world, playbooks that you would want to utilize in the case of an incident. So for an MSP, I would say understand there are products like SOAR out there, but there are also products out there like Dana's working on and various other companies out there in the channel that are trying to solve it specifically around making it more obtainable by more organizations, as opposed to being this super expensive, super costly product offering that's out of the reach of most service providers. I kind of like to equate it to, most service providers aren't using Splunk for their SIM. They may be using Alien Vault or something that's exponentially cheaper because they only need a smaller subset of what's involved in there. And Splunk bought Phantom, and now Phantom's a part of the Splunk family. And so now it's a product offering, again, catering towards enterprises. The price point is way outside of reach for any service provider. And frankly, it's too much for the majority of service providers. So yeah, go ahead, Dana.
Dana, value add?
At the end of the day, tools like SOAR make a lot of sense in the enterprise because it comes down to the 3 Ps. Do you have the right people? Do you have the right process? And then you worry about the product. And so at the end of the day, SOAR will only work if you have automated instrumentation and log ingestion, which typically means you have to have a SIM before you even get into this stuff, because ultimately those alerts got to go somewhere so you can process them. And then you typically need to have a SOC. And if you have the SOC, then you're going to have the people that have the expertise there. Now you're actually starting to get into being a true MSSP, in which case most of those people that have that experience don't need to invest in the SOAR tools because they already have a better process in place with the instrumentation they have. In our world, we use RMM tools and PSA tools. How do we shunt those logs into a common way so that we can look for anomalies, look for information, and tune for silence? So we're only looking at the things that are really truly incidents we have to look at. And then ultimately going the other way is when we see something, how do we respond? Right? Like sometimes it's the basic stuff we can't get right. We can have the most amazing security technology out there, and if we don't know how is the fastest way to recover that doctor's PC so he can get back to helping patients, versus how did I get the instrumentation tools to get all the logs, to get over here, to process it all, to do it. So in the end, SOAR is awesome if you have the skill set to leverage it, but it's priced and designed for not the MSPs typically, right? Even when you look at what you're talking about with Phantom and Splunk, like I'm a big fan of Splunk. I've always really enjoyed it as a SIM system, but now, I'm seeing stuff that, when we look at all the shunting that comes through public cloud and hybrid cloud, so like even Azure AD today and Azure Monitor, you can take all your on-premise logs, bring them up into correlation into Azure, process that all, and then use runbooks directly in there to process all that. And what's your cost base to that compared to loading out something for SOAR? There will always be security technologies trying to make things easier, but if you don't have the people that understand it, and you don't have the processes to implement the response for anything that comes out of the other side, the tools are useless.
Yeah, and one point there, Harry, just onto that. It's also this bigger picture. You can't just be doing it with just security. You need to be shifting towards everything being orchestrated and automated in some form or fashion as much as you possibly can, because really what's happening is you're trying to solve for a couple of things. One is you're trying to make your processes repeatable, and you're trying to do it with possibly the same amount of people, usually, and with the talent shortage that's happening, usually the same amount of people, not even less people. You're just trying to augment the people you have, and then understanding how to get into orchestrating and automating everything you do, because a lot of companies are doing it with PSAs. I mean, you're doing your business processes in your PSA. You're doing possibly some automation in RMM. The problem is there's so much more out there with everything as a service that you have to understand how you're automating against APIs, how you're building cloud infrastructure with templates, and then how does that map to the security side of it. So I think that SOAR is not really, SOAR by itself, if you're just talking about solely the product offerings, the product offering and the section of products is unobtainable for most MSPs. But there are ways to be able to understand what your responses are to actionable incidents that happen, and then being able to do something with it. And so I would say that that's the key, is you have to be able to take actionable things and do something with it, and it's going to be in a much smaller subset way. You're not going to have 10 million IOCs or indicators of compromise or whatever may happen, or incidents. From a enterprise standpoint, you may have 10 things that come up in a day, maybe 5, I mean maybe 100, who knows. But the point is, it's much smaller subsets, so the processes are you have to take that process still to try to automate, but it's not going to be at the same scale by any means. So yeah.
Cool. And you mentioned Splunk. So there's some people online today. I peeked. So we have Stephen Alford down in the Southern Cal, Yulee in Hawaii, and Rusty in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And they're going to recognize this name, Jerome Stewart, who was on the original Small Business Server Development team. Dana, maybe you had the pleasure of meeting and working with Jerome. And do you know, he's an executive now over at Splunk, that little Peace Corps volunteer. I mean, I'm shining his shoes now. Can you believe it? But super good guy. And look, folks, look up Jerome Stewart on LinkedIn. He was there at the beginning. We move on. We're getting a little tight on time. So let's knock out. I think I got 3 slides left. We're going to speed up. Top 2 concerns going to public cloud or security and lack of expertise. How do MSPs solve for this? Gentlemen, give me the fastest 1 minute in sports on this. We've kind of covered this, but let's just reiterate. How can MSPs solve for this? Dana, I'll go with you first.
Well, that's kind of a loaded question, since what we build is tools to help MSPs improve from a lack of experience in cloud. So without saying, get tools that help, it really comes down to understand one key thing. The cloud is nothing more but IT infrastructure on computers you don't control anymore. It's just a longer latency. At the end of the day, how you manage IT is the same way. Yes, there's changes because now you have PaaS and SaaS, so you don't have control all the time. Agent-based solutions don't always work because you don't have access to the underlying servers. But the aspects, the traditional fundamentals of how do you protect information, how do you control access control, how do you protect the data, how do you back up, how do you restore, how do you ensure who's the custodians and what to do when an incident occurs, that's no different than what we were doing on premise. It's just with bigger computers where we don't have anymore, and we've moved from a CapEx to an OpEx model for most businesses. If we can understand that and we treat our experience as IT professionals and then get the right tooling that can help, because let's be honest, Microsoft's moving a mile a minute, so is Amazon, so is Google. Their clouds are changing so frequently. It's about tapping into that world and then knowing how to use it. The world of cloud only isn't going to be here overnight. We're going to have a world of a hybrid IT infrastructure where we're going to have an intelligent cloud, an intelligent edge, and data having to work in between. So we just need to understand the new modern way we're working, and ultimately partner with those people that are trying to help you be successful there. And if you care about Azure, please reach out to me, because I'd love to have a conversation without even talking about my products to learn what's paining you.
Yep. Michael, give it your best shot.
Yeah, so I would say to that point, I mean, any tools or platforms that you can leverage to help the lack of expertise. A lot of them, have some sort of security aspect built in, or they are completely security focused going to the public cloud. I would just say that, from a standpoint of security, to Dana's point, it's no different than on-premise. The one difference to it is how you actually, there are some nuances to how that particular infrastructure and services work. If you're sheerly mapping your on-premise workloads to or data center workloads to the public cloud, but for everything else, it is just hardware somewhere else that you're able to be much more agile and ephemeral with, from a standpoint of you have a lot more control about what you want to have up, when you want to have it up and running for customers, what services you want, being able to leverage PaaS and things like different types of services like Azure backups and key vaults and things that you may not even think about that you're not using on premise, or maybe you were using some sort of tool, but being able to now have products that you can have built into your entire process and how you can go about doing things. But I would be very careful and cognizant about the defaults, to Dana's point, and how things are structured from the cloud provider side, because they're catering to everybody. And so they're expecting you to know what you're doing, to then do whatever you're going to do to keep your customers secure. And so make sure you reach out to experts out there. A lot of us, like Dana said, myself, I love talking to people, helping to give advice and what I can do to further the channel as a whole, to getting people understanding that it's not as daunting as they may think it is. There are ways to get into the public cloud, and it's pretty exciting, to be honest.
Do a Google search for shared responsibility model. Make sure you're looking, because you cannot abdicate responsibility of security to the cloud vendor.
Okay.
Security model, because at the end of the day, you have to understand what the cloud vendor is responsible for and what you're responsible for. You may not need to patch the infrastructure anymore, but you might need to patch the software. You might not need to worry about ensuring the servers are up, but you need to make sure that you're backing that data up away from that.
There we go.
Yeah, and you can look at some.
I made it sticky.
The NIST framework has some of that mapped inside. I know they do AWS. I haven't seen the Azure one, but anyway, there are documents out there too. So if anybody's interested, reach out. I have a bunch of things around different things like the NIST framework, and it's exactly what you're talking about, Dana. The shared responsibility, what the cloud provider is responsible for, and what you, the MSP, is responsible for, or the customer.
Well,
I on my blog, I have a blog post about that. So if you go to daneup.com, you can check that out. There's a whole post where I talk about how that all works.
Yeah, and we'll, with your permission, we'll put. Is it okay to put your contact details in the thank you letter that goes out tomorrow? Okay, and we'll put Dana Epp, your blog. Just making a note.
Can't go wrong.
All right, and then we need to wrap. So two things. One about reaching out to Michael Frazier. So Michael, I know you're completing your master's degree in computer science at Seattle U. You're up in the cum laude GPA. I never was. I barely carried a 3.0. When will you be done with your master's? Because you're a busy man. Is that 2019? You're going to wrap the master's?
Yes, June, middle of June is the projected timeline. So I am looking forward to it, and I'll be wrapping up my GI Bill benefit that I have essentially next quarter as well. So I'm trying to tie it up with a nice little bow.
There we go. All right, and I'm going to answer the last question, gentlemen, because we are at time, and I have a perspective on cybersecurity talent shortage. What should MSPs do about it? So I'm going to answer this one, and we'll call it good. Is that part of my being freed up from the book you gave me? I have a couple hours a day free, and one of my outside interests is the academic community. And so, I've had interesting chats with Bellevue College here in Seattle at analytics, and I was doing a little research in the Texas college system, so down in Austin, and it's very interesting how different states fund education. So, for example, Washington State is fairly generous. We're a wealthy state, and it's part of our DNA and Microsoft and Amazon and all that. So I get that. Down in Austin, in their IT program in a similar college, a 2-year, 4-year community college, guys, they were still teaching XP and NetWare, and it was underfunded, and I'm like, really? And so that's something I do on my own time, is to see the differences. So the answer to this question is, I have now come full circle personally back to a thumbs up on CompTIA with the security certification. I've had a love-hate relationship with CompTIA. at the end of the day, I love them. I'm just not a big trade association guy. I'm not going to carry a sign out in Washington D.C. for H-1B1 legislation. So that's not how I roll. But I've come after my research. I've come all the way around, and I would offer start with the CompTIA Security Plus. Dana or Michael, you get the last words on how can MSPs become more skilled in cybersecurity.
Do it by doing. If you're on the tactical and technical side, look at things like SANS certifications for GSEC and things like that. If you're more looking at it from the business side of it, look at things like the CISSP and the ISAC stuff. These all provide mechanisms. Understand, though, what you're getting into. When you look at something like the CISSP, it's a mile wide but an inch deep, right? It's about understanding how everything relates together, but you're not the one that's going to go in and do the forensic analysis on that stuff. If you're a geek and you truly love it, go find the things you like and want to be part of and be an expert in and go and do it. You really should understand the tools out there, and there's tons of honeypot sites that allow you to learn how to breach and learn how to recover and how to respond to it. Learn by doing. There's education out there. Those certifications, like the SANS certifications, are quite useful, especially if you can do the labs.
Yeah.
Go to big conferences. I'm a big fan. I don't like the commercial security conferences like RSA, even Black Hat's now getting too commercial. But you can go to the ones like DEF CON, where you have a lot of time that, as long as you know how to go to DEF CON, you can learn quite a bit about the type of threats and risks that exist out there. It's not about that, though. You then think back, how does that affect my business? Are we putting in the right processes in place, and do we understand how to respond to that? Just always use this attitude: assume breach. Everything you can learn on how to address that is valuable insights on how to become a better professional when it comes to security.
And Michael, before you offer your final comment on talent and training, because again, you're getting your master's degree in computer science at a well-respected college, Seattle University, and God bless you, man. That is cool. I would offer that's a channel to address the talent shortage. Now you're coming in a little bit higher level, my friend.
Yeah, so it's actually funny because I was just speaking at Seattle University at the inaugurals. They call it Cyberhawks, essentially a cybersecurity group that was put together on campus with CS students, undergraduates and masters. And there is a major push, or I shouldn't say, there's a major interest in cybersecurity coming from the computer science side, and I think that is going to help a lot to fill in the shortage, specifically because a lot of the stuff we're going to software defined requires people to inherently have computer science, at least fundamental understanding of how all of this stuff works. And so I think that, yeah, you're right. And I think that addressing that, you don't need to, if you're in a computer science program, you don't have to just go out there and go try to just start building apps. You can, and that's great, but there are other avenues to be able to utilize your schooling to be able to apply specifically around cybersecurity, cloud, anything that's going to help. I mean, when I worked at Optiv for about a year, large cybersecurity VAR, and one of the main issues that we saw all the time was that people wanted to have security engineers that had understanding, being able to build stuff in Python, or being able to be able to understand how some of these different products work. So, being able to get into cybersecurity, and everybody looks at cybersecurity as, okay, great, I can get in, I can start hacking, I can do pen testing, all that great stuff. But there's this wide world and opportunity of different things that you could do in cybersecurity, and having the ability to understand, actually being able to code is going to leave you way far above the rest of anybody that's trying to get into that industry. So
IT ops and DevOps coming together,
Yep.
We're getting closer and closer, blurring those lines. Yeah, absolutely.
Amen. We'll make that the final word. Jenny, thank you so much. As usual, in the radio control room, folks, you're going to get a thank you letter tomorrow, an email with contact information, some resources, and the replay link. And gentlemen, thank you very much. In fact, Dana, when you're down here, we're both here, you're there. So when you're down here, let us know. We'll get together for a beer or whatever.
I'll be down in middle of March for MVP Summit. So why don't we get together?
All right.
Yeah, we'll all get together, Harry.
Yeah. We'll all get together. All right. Okay. Thank you.
Guys.
Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.